All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. We are continuing our Lotalingo webinar series today with a very popular topic that many folks have requested, which is Canadian study permits. We're very lucky to be joined today by Christian. Thank you for joining, Christian.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yes, we're very excited to have your expertise. So today I'm going to go through a quick introduction of who Christian and I are, why study in Canada, why it's such a popular destination, and run through just some quick numbers. Christian will lead us in an process overview of applying for a study permit, and crucially, how to avoid some of the mistakes that he sees a lot. And we'll spend quite a bit of time on Q&A with some of the questions that I've received from you all. So without further ado, here's who we are. I'm Ian. I'm the founder of Lotalingo, a global mobility company. And again, very lucky to be joined today by Christian, who is a regulated Canadian immigration consultant out of Ottawa. So student permits to Canada, they're still so popular. Why? Three big reasons, right? Canada continues to be known as one of the safest places to live. It's got a very multicultural society, and compared to many places in the United States, it's relatively more affordable. Once you graduate with a Canadian degree, it's quite a respected one. There's very strong academic standards at these universities, great research opportunities. So it's a degree that lots of employers value. And of course, this is something that's somewhat unique. It's not available in every university, but you can actually work part-time for the most part during your studies. And after graduation, if you qualify, you can also stay and work for an additional 3 years. That's a huge advantage for launching a career. But it is more important than ever to prepare and well, which is why I'm grateful to have Christian on this call with us. Because two, things are happening. One is Canada continues to be, as you saw on the previous slide, a very popular place for people to want to study. And at the same time, the Canadian government is reducing the amount of study permits that it's granting. So if you just look at this, quick chart from before COVID baseline to all the way now in 2005, you see that there's been an initial bump, right, during 2001 to 2003 from the COVID rebound, which was quickly followed by reductions. And so the climate seems to be that we're going to see future reductions as well, which means, it's very key to make sure that application is rock solid. So with that, Christian, I'll hand it over to you to cover the process overview and key mistakes to avoid.
Thank you so very much, Ian. It's a pleasure to be in this webinar. I think the first thing we need to start with is, for people to understand that there are different types of study permits. So you have the regular study permit, and then you have the student direct stream study permit. Why they sound to be the same, but they're not, even though at the end of the day, what you're going to get is a study permit. The difference is just how you do the application, as well as the timelines. For the regular study permit, it goes through the normal process, and it's basically what most people do all over the world. If you're trying to apply either to come to a college or university, you go through the regular process, right? The application period may vary depending on where you're coming from, as well as the workload of the immigration office in the country where you're applying for. Right, so there's certain things you have to look at, the biometrics, and stuff like that. The study plan, etc., and ensure that you have the right designated learning institution. On the direct student direct stream, on the other hand, it's open to a select group of countries where the processing times appear to be faster, right? And there are certain conditions that must also be there, right? In terms of you having a guaranteed investment certificate and stuff like that. But that's just a cursory overview. Ultimately, whether you're going to go through a regular study permit or student direct stream, my advice will be meet an expert to be able to find that out, because ultimately that determines whether or not your application get expedited processing, or you just go through the regular processing in the system. Yeah. I'm just going to go through the regular application process overview. Basically, there are like 4 steps for anybody who's interested. The first step would be the admission as well as the doc insurance. So basically, you have to have an offer of acceptance from a designated learning institution. It is important, I can't stress this enough. A DLI is critical because in your application letter, the DLI has a number. That number is one of the things that IRCC looks out for when you're doing your application. But suffice to say that all primary schools or kindergarten, all are designated learning institutions. We're talking about when you're going to college, university, and stuff like that. That's really why it's important. And so basically, they have to give you a letter of acceptance. Certain rules have changed depending on the kind of program you're doing now. The letter of acceptance goes almost in tandem with a provisional attestation letter. Basically, what the provinces are trying to do is to ensure that for every letter of acceptance that is issued to a foreign student, there is a spot for that student guaranteed before the processing takes place. So it's always important your people know that. And then the second stage is you apply for your study permit. You pay all the rest of the relevant fees to IRCC. So the 2 ways you can do that, you can actually have your own portal, or you can have a designated representative, basically help you with the entire process, in which case they will have their own portal in which correspondences will come to them, from IRCC. Okay. So basically, what you're expected to do, you're expected to include all the requisite application forms. You're expected to include the proof of funds. You're expected to put your passport, any other documentation that is required. Of course, that also includes the letter of acceptance. That letter includes, in most cases, the provisional attestation letter, and any other document that is required. It could be also a language requirement that is required. You also have to put that in. So that's part of that. The third step is, your biometrics, your medical, and as well as document review. In some situations, you're expected to provide your biometrics. Your biometrics basically means your fingerprint. So we have the visa application centers, or the certain centers that are, have been opened by IRCC in several countries, where you can go and have your fingerprint taken. If it's required, then that is one of the conditions you have to do. And then you do your medical. It's called the e-medical. Normally, anybody who's going to be in Canada for more than 6 months, in most situations, required to have a medical, right? So we're not going to go into the intricacies of why a medical is required, but suffice to say, it's one of the conditions that may be required. And then, if at the end of the day you have 2 things that can happen. You have the standard application where IRCC just issues your standard letter if everything is everything is fine. If not, they may request an interview. Now, don't be scared if an interview is called. It's just where they have like different issues. If they need some clarification, the interview may be requested. And then the next one is the next step, which is the 4th step, which everybody hopes to have. It's when you basically receive your permit and you want to travel to Canada. In that situation, you basically have your study permit. It has been approved. In most situations, the layette will be put in your passport when you land, but you have to have a letter, and then at the point of entry, the study permit will be put on your passport. Or so there are different methodologies. Some countries it may not apply, some countries it may be like that. And then you travel to Canada. We get to the airport. At the point of entry, you show them that you have your approval, and then that's how it is. So the process simply means you get your admission and your document issuance. You apply for your permit. In most cases, you do your biometrics, your medical. If everything goes well, straight up get your study permit. If not, they call you for an interview if there's certain things that they want clarification on, and then you basically receive your permit, and then you travel to Canada. So that is just a cursory overview of how you apply for that process. Um, However, I have noticed that, as a professional, when I'm looking at study permit application, there's some mistakes that I think people make that perhaps leads to the applications being denied. And don't forget, one of the things that Ian did when we started this slide was to show how over the years, the study permit application numbers have dropped substantially. If I'm not mistaken, I think this year we're looking at probably, and this is just me spitting out, the final numbers, just the numbers there. It's about 437,000. Um, so it therefore means, compared to other years where you could have 800,000, it therefore means that you have to ensure you get it right. We can't stress it enough. Now is not the time to make silly mistakes. Now is not the time to have selective amnesia when it comes to certain things. You have to get it right from the get-go. And some of the things that I have discovered in terms of just some key mistakes to avoid. You have, for example, people having forms that are incomplete, or even worst case, to have the wrong application forms. Now, one thing most people don't even understand is that IRCC, which is the Immigration and Refugee Citizenship of Canada, regularly updates its application forms. It's as simple as that. It means a lot. If you are using an application form that is obsolete in terms of IRCC has updated it 6 months ago, and you submitted it, that application will be returned on grounds of incompletion because you're not submitting the most up-to-date application form. So I think it's something that people should look at, or certain informations are left, those are part of the, the reasons, that some of your applications, may not be approved. A key thing, another thing I think is the lack of funds. I also find it very curious that you're trying to go for study, and while you are in contact with the admissions department of the university, and you have your letter of acceptance, it tells you what the tuition will be, and it gives you an approximation of your living cost. And most people, well, I'm not going to use most people, a lot of people look at it as information that doesn't matter. But lo and behold, it's a fundamental issue. IRCC wants to be sure that you have adequate fund to pursue what you said you were going to come to do in Canada, which is study. So if, for example, I think this year, the cost of living is about 20,635, and then you have your tuition, right? So what you expect is the tuition plus 1 year cost of living. You should have an approximation of what that is. That tells the officer that you have enough fund to at least pursue the primary reason why you're coming to Canada. So if there's no fund or inadequate fund, that may be a problem. Another thing we found is applicants basically don't have strong ties to their country or place of habitual residence. What do we mean? You should understand that coming to study is of a temporary nature. Yes, irrespective of the length of your study, it could be a 2-year program, it could be a master's program, it could be a PhD program, but the initial idea is a temporary form of study. Whether or not you look at other options of how to acquire permanent residency, that's another discussion for another day. So it means that you must be able to convince the officer that you have substantial ties to your country that will serve as an incentive to go back. So the more ties you're able to show, whether it's social ties, whether it's economic ties, whether it's family ties, the more that serves as an incentive to go back, and hence perhaps gives you a better chance in terms of how your application is viewed. So for me, I find that weak ties is a problem. You choosing also the wrong program of study, that's a problem that I find now. And I think right now it's even more important, especially knowing how the Canadian economy is changing, especially knowing how you have to also be aware of what are the needs of Canada. That's on one aspect. The second aspect is, if you as an applicant, let's say, for example, you want to do a master's program, and all the time you have been, working, you've been in the HR area, and all of a sudden you want to pursue a degree in zoology, that may be a problem. What is the relevance? How is that connected to what you're currently doing or what you aspire to do? So I think there is a need for students and parents and guardians to really sit down, not only with their kids, but with experts in this field, to really fashion out a roadmap as to why they want to study and what they need to study. So that's what I have found. Also, choosing the wrong designated learning institution. There's some designated learning institutions that are not PGWP enabled, meaning that there's some schools you select and you get some programs. Those programs are not eligible for a post-graduation work permit. Remember when Ian started, at the beginning, it was giving some of the reasons why people want to study in Canada is you're allowed to work part-time and perhaps in some programs stay for 3 years. Well, that only works if you go to the right school in terms of the program and in terms of it, offering you programs that are PGWP enabled. So I also find that as one of the reasons. Another reason will be people, just miss deadlines. You have correspondence to IRCC and they tell you, please send your medical on or before so and so date. And well, you take that as just a suggestion. No, it's not a suggestion. It's what you need to be able to have the application successful. So inability to meet deadlines, it's also one of the things I've discovered. Another one I think is coming from my head is the lack of a study plan, right? Why do you want to study? You don't even have that plan, right? Some people call it an SOP, a statement of purpose. But it is critical. Why not study in your in your country? Why select Canada? And more importantly, why are you selecting that institution in Canada? What is the reason behind it? Is it that your country doesn't have the requisite educational institutions to pursue that program? If I can just do a quick Google search and find out that it does, then why are you selecting Canada and that country? So you have to have a solid SOP. And the next one, I think it also has something to do with the first one I said, using outdated documents. So the two ways, your document must not be still dated. Let's assume that you're going to submit your application in December this year, 2025. And then your bank statement that you brought was for January to February, for January to June 2024. There's over a year has passed. That kind of document is outdated. So there's constantly, you have to look at your documentation, make sure they're not still dated, make sure that they are relevant as per the time you submit the application. So that's another thing I look at. Another one is having inconsistency of information, and you will be shocked as to how people are inconsistent. You have people using the middle name as the first name, the surname as the last name, and vice versa. It just goes all over. You have people having inconsistency as to their history for what you do. You have people having inconsistencies as to or gaps as to certain information. That creates a problem for the immigration officer, where they cannot piece together the basic question, who is this applicant? Then it leaves a question mark for the officer to decide, is this person coming to Canada genuinely for purpose of study, or is there an untoward motive? So for most candidates, for most parents and most wards and guardians, I tell them, let's make sure that there are no inconsistency. So perhaps you need to get an expert to review some of your documents, look at the application to ensure that there are no gaps. And where there are inconsistencies, then let's all be able to have the right information to explain those inconsistencies in a rational, logical manner. So And then there are other issues, and other issues can be people outright lie, the application, and just basically lie. If they've had, let's say, some denials before, IFCC asks you a question: have you ever applied to Canada or any other country? And they say no, thinking it was only Canada. No, the question was, have you ever applied for a visa or whatever to Canada or any other, or holding Canada, any other. So that's one of the problems we see, and that's even me as a professional. Before I submit an application, I go through the application forms and I ask that question over and over before we submit. Just 1 second before I leave that slide. Why that is important is, for any misrepresentation, whether it was overt or covert, that is found out, there is the likelihood of a ban for 5 years from Canada. So that's a 5-year ban. I cannot stress it enough. Most people find, in my practice, for example, they say, Christian Akwara, you're so detailed oriented, you're detailed obsessed. There's a reason for me being detailed obsessed. That's the reason, because if we miss that information and you inadvertently lied or you omitted the information, and an expert did not grill you to say what the truth is, at the end of the day, since the documentation has been signed, there is a declaration that is made in all the application forms. It is I, whoever the name of the applicant is, have gone through all the information, and I declare that all the information contained therein in these application forms are true, complete, and accurate. The moment your signature appears on it, which is your name as well as the date, it is deemed to be a declaration. If they discover that something is different from that declaration, then we have a problem. That's misrepresentation. And if you're found out to have misrepresented, because they give you the procedural affairs process, but if you're found out to have misrepresented, it means you're banned for 5 years from all aspects of Canadian immigration. When I mean all aspects, I mean every aspect of Canadian immigration, whether it is somebody wants to sponsor you, whether you want to visit, whether you want to come to study, you are basically banned for 5 years. So that, for me, is it's very critical. Okay. Again, I said there's certain mistakes we have to avoid, and those mistakes, they also dovetail in the last slide. But now we give it more flesh, we give it more impetus. The first one is the inconsistencies in the application forms. Now, when you're doing a study permit application to Canada, there's certain forms that go with the process. Applications for study permit in Canada, there's also family information form, and then application for a temporary resident visa. There are like 3 or 4 forms, depending on whether you're applying through the regular stream or you're applying, for the from the direct stream. But all in all, those forms that are constant. Now, if the information in your family information form is different from what you have in the application for visa to Canada, application for study permit in Canada, then that inconsistency raises a question. If the inconsistencies with respect to the name of your siblings, the inconsistency with respect to the name of your father, your mother, and stuff like that, then it becomes a problem. If the name on your passport is not what you put on the application form, then why? You have to explain. So for me, I try to look at applicants, separately. There are times certain people may not have certain documentation. Then we can use, a format we use in the system. We have a way of explaining that. But where there are so many inconsistencies that even you as an applicant looking at the documentation, we know that this inconsistency is too much, then we have to have a sit down and discuss. So for me, I think that's the first thing that we have to avoid. The next thing we have to avoid is any form of misrepresentation or fraud. It behoves on us as practitioners in the business to uphold the integrity of the Canadian immigration process. So I tell people, please do not engage in fraudulent practice. What do I mean? Do not forge documents. We've had situations where people forge documents, where people, forge lease agreements and they forge banking documents. No, that is a mistake to avoid, because if you're caught, as I said, I cannot stress it enough, there is a 5-year ban. And there's still no guarantee that after the 5-year ban that, things are going to run smooth, because what that simply means is that you're now, to use the popular term, you're now a candidate of particular concern. It means that any IRCC officer subsequent to the ban being lifted is going to look at your application with a magnifying glass, and you don't want that. You want your application to just go through the normal process. You don't want it to be put aside for a PM4, PM5 officer to just sit down and let's look at this thing critically, right? Another one is, as we discussed, is the insufficiency of funds. Now, I cannot stress this enough. The funds for your study are critical. But let's work at a scenario. Assuming you're coming for a 4-year program, and just assume that the tuition fee for purpose of this, this webinar, will be 20,000 Canadian a year. 20,000 times 4 will be 80,000. Then the question you're going to ask me, Chris, am I expected to pay 80,000 tuition? The answer is no. The answer is no. But by law, you must show that at least you have 1 year proof of fund to be able to do that program. Let's say it's a 4-year program with that figure that I just hypothesized. However, the funds could either come from you, or it could be from your parents, or from somebody who is linked to you, who sponsors you, right? So if you're being sponsored, for example, by an uncle, then I strongly recommend, in addition to the fund, show the connection between you and that uncle. There has to be a connection, right? So it's important that people understand that. Another thing would be, if you poorly structure your statement of purpose, that I have seen, hundreds and hundreds of times, where you couldn't articulate why you want to study that program in Canada. An example would be, so let's say a student from Rwanda who wants to come to a university in Toronto to study mechanical engineering. 5 questions I'm going to ask you. 1, is there no university in Rwanda? And sorry for those who are from Rwanda, I'm just using this as an example. Please, I'm originally from Africa without a Canadian, so I'm just using it as an example. The first question is, are there no university in that country? If the answer is yes, stating your statement of purpose, then why do you want to do this mechanical engineering at this university in Toronto? Is it that they have a department that is now world class, or is it that there's a particular unit that is in a realm of mechanical engineering that that skill set, when you acquire it, you take it back to Rwanda, will basically have a multiplier effect? So you have to structure your statement of purpose. It has to be able to show why you want to study, what you need, what you're going to do with that program, and how you can use that program to aid or advance your country. There's a tie back mechanism. You have to be able to tie it back, right? So for me, that's one of the things I like to put time on with parents, guardians and wards, in terms of us structuring that properly. And then we discuss about ties to the home country. The ties are not just you saying it verbatim. The ties are based on the documentation. For everything we say in the application form, you have to document it, right? So Oh, I'm a 21-year-old. I want to study in Canada. I have parents. I have to prove that I have parents. So my birth certificate. So I put that aside. Um, I I went to a college in Nigeria, for example. I bring that to show that. I'm a member of an institution, a professional body. I show that. I volunteer. I do one or two things in a church, in a community center. I basically get letters to show that. What am I? I'm trying to show that I have ties. So every of those things, the things like that. And then we talked about, the program choice, and then the time of the application. When you submit the application, do not submit your application late. And please, if you get a letter for a medical, ensure you do the medical. The medicals are not suggestions. So we're like, oh, and one thing I must also talk about the medicals is that we call them panel physician. You cannot do your medical with your family doctor. No. So IRCC sends you the letter, and in your area, there are panel physicians that are recognized by IRCC. So you have to go to that panel physician. So you go with a copy of your letter and you go with a copy of your passport. And then the medical is conducted. And then, if you tell them you want to do an upfront medical, then they will give you an e-medical information sheet. That document will be one of the things we'll put in the application form. But you tell them you need a copy of the e-medical information sheet. But you cannot go to your own personal physician, your personal, doctor for IRCC medical. So most people, well, Chris, but why? It's to ensure that it is neutral. We trust doctors, but it's also to ensure that the system is an equal playing field for candidates worldwide. And then the last one I think that's also important is language requirements. Some schools recommend or require that you show an ability to converse in English or French. And if they require IELTS, the academic, to have a certain level, then you have to show that. But as I said, different schools have different requirements. So it's best you get in touch with the admin unit of admin department of the school to find out what the requirements are. And then once everything's in place, meet a professional so that you can have a stress-free process. So thank you, Ian. So I think this was just like a quick overview of some of the
It was quick, but it was extremely informative, dense in information. So thank you, Christian, for sharing your expertise with us. So if you have a little bit of time, we can run through some of the questions
Absolutely.
that we've received in the lead up to this, because it's a very, very popular topic.
Absolutely.
I think the first one is something you mentioned about getting called in for interviews. I know people get concerned about this because not every application, right, will require an interview, unlike some
Yes.
other countries' processes. So in your practice, what have you seen most sort of leading to the interview, and how can students prepare for that?
That's a very fantastic question. And this is just from what I've seen in practice. The first thing that I notice is if the officer somehow has a doubt as to the genuineness of that application. And what do I mean? You have a 52-year-old who left school 25 years ago. And the initial highest level of education was at a university degree, not at a master's degree. And all of a sudden, you're now 25 years after, you're now saying you want to come and do a diploma program, a 2-year program in, any program, right? While not doubting that you really want to study, the officer may like, hang on, I want to really know more. I want to know more. So if you call for an interview, don't see it as as a death sentence. Don't see that, have I done something wrong? It could be that the officer wants to know. And really, maybe they genuinely want to know.
And some
Or
genuine curiosity
there's a
around your
genuine
application. Yeah.
curiosity. And there's certain things you tend to be able to clarify where you have face-to-face or system to system meeting like this. I can look at the body language, I can see inflections, I can really read you, right? So that's one aspect. Another aspect could be perhaps certain information came to them. Let's say they looked at your police report and something caught their eye and they wanted clarification. Or there was a judgment. It could be a plethora of anything. But at the end of the day, it is for clarification. It is to also help the officer to ensure that they are maintaining the integrity of the immigration process. Because for IRCC, the key is to ensure that the integrity of the system is upheld. It also aids the client to understand that yes, they just want to find out one or two things, and as long as you're not hiding anything, as long as the explanations you're giving are to the best of your ability honest, you shouldn't have any need to be worried. Or if something came up during the medical and they need you to know in terms of privacy reason, because there's a way you have to broach the subject. So that could be a reason, it could be 1,000 things, but don't see it like, oh, the moment they call me for a for an interview, then something is awry, or you're not going to be given the study permit or being approved. That has not necessarily been what I've seen in my practice.
Great, great. I'm sure that helps some folks feel better there. Another question that I think has been coming up a lot is, okay, this notion of linking or communicating ties to the home country and having strong ties to the home country.
Yeah.
I imagine, there's lots of students who they are, they're wanting to get this degree, and they actually don't like they may want to contribute to Canada for a couple of years after, and get that post-graduation work permit. So how do they kind of toe this line between, okay, I want to show that I have strong ties to my home country, but I also am genuinely interested in working in Canada. I think that could be a great experience for my career. What do you recommend there in terms of the balance?
Oh, that's a very good question. Basically, I tell people, show the basic things that you have. You're coming to Canada for purposes of studying, getting that degree, improving your life, perhaps stay in Canada and work, and perhaps when you're done, go back to your country or find other routes. But at the initial stage, there's certain information about you that we must have that are key. You have siblings. If you don't, that's still not a problem. But if you have siblings, can you get their birth certificates as well?
Mm.
You are a member of an association or an institution, whatever it is, get letters from them. You have your initial college degree or whatever it is, just bring it in. You have letters of support from your parents, just bring it in. It doesn't have to be this mountain of documentation, but there's certain things that are just very basic. Now, the younger you are, the less I'm going to ask you for other things. If you're 16 and you want to come to Canada to do a college program, then what other ties other than your parents and your siblings and the fact that what else am I going to ask from you? You know what I mean? So for me, the older you get, the more you've been able to be established in your society, and logic dictates that the more ties you should be able to have. For example, a 35-year-old wants to do a master's program. in Canada from Laos. You're 35. You've worked. You've gone to school. You've contributed something economically to Laos. There are some ties that you can show. That doesn't take away the fact that when you come to Canada, you get the study, you still want to work, you still want to contribute to Canada. So it still balances out. So it's a function of look at the age, it's a function, look at the timelines of spent in their country. It's also a function of how long have they, contributed economically to their country. So the more you've contributed economically to your country of nationality or your country of habitual residence, the more ties you should be able to show. You're not living in isolation, right? I can still show ties. Let's say I want to go to New Zealand to study. And New Zealand is telling me, show the ties that you have to Canada. I must be able to show ties. It's logical. But if a 16-year-old, is applying, what are you going to tell them to do? You're going to tell them to show that they've worked? You're going to tell them to show that they've paid taxes? No. But you're going to expect them to be able to show, hey, this is my mom. This is my dad. I went to this was the kindergarten I went to, or this is the club I belong to. I go bowling every week. There has to be something. It doesn't matter how small, and then you can always balance, because ultimately, what is Canada looking for? And this is the elephant in the room. Not just Canada. Most clients, most industrial clients, you're looking for young, upwardly mobile individuals who can contribute economically. Mm. So the sweet spot, age 1 to age 40 or 45. Mm. That's, for me, is what I find as a sweet spot. And I say age 1 because the younger you are, the better. So that, for me, is key. And if you belong to the demographic of 35 to 45, then show that you have ties to your country of nationality or country of habitual residence.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's good that it sounds like it sort of scales. They're not going to expect anything crazy of you if you're on the younger end. So that's very nice. Do you have time for one more, Christian?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm having a blast.
Okay, great. I think we have lots of students who are worried, because it seems like a lot of the questions are clustered around timing. When to apply to sort of get ahead of any procrastination or late deadline issues. Yes. And if they were to, work with, someone like yourself, or to hire somebody to assist them with this process, when should they actually start that, in relation to the admissions deadlines?
That's a fantastic question. The first thing I look at people is I tell them, please do not cut it close. Let's assume that school is the program you want to go to is in class date starts September. I'm just giving that as an example. Don't put your application in August. You're cutting it too close, because IRCC has processing times. Apply well in advance. Give the officer, and another thing you deal with when you discuss dealing with your professional is we always have our eyes on the processing times for that country. So I always advise my clients, like, okay, let's start the document, collection now. Let's start the thing now, having an eye on the processing time. The processing time that is released by IRCC are just for guidance. They're not cast in cement, and they use the right phraseology to ensure that you can't sue them for that. We just advise it. So if the processing time is, let's say, 3 months, it means if your application has no issues, if it's just a standard, standard application, there's no misrepresentation, the forms are okay, everything is okay. In 3 months, they should come to a resolution, everything together. But it starts from the day it is submitted, the day IRCC gets it, the day it is transmitted to IRCC. So they're basically saying that within 3 months we're going to do this. Other areas maybe 2 months, maybe so depend on the area. I tell people who have come in contact with, the first one we look at the process time for your country, and we say this is a program we're also looking for. When is the class date? When are we starting? I will recommend we do 3 months, at least 3 months before that period we submit. So that gives us enough time. If there are issues that come up in terms of interview, we have enough time, and then, but if it does happen that, there's a delay, you can always write to the school for an extension, they can always start you on a later day. But I advise people, don't cut it close. No, don't cut it close. Yeah.
Okay, folks, you heard it here first. At least 3 months. Don't cut it close. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Christian. For those of you who are coming to this later, you can go and find Christian's profile directly here at the link below, lottalingo.com/Christian. And again, thank you so much. I think this was so helpful.
Thank you so much. It's a privilege. It's a privilege. Thank you so much.
All right.